read. Chapter 6 is relatively brief compared to the other 11 in the book, and if we can, and they're 5 and 6 are somewhat connected. Remember that the chapter verse breakdown is in some sense arbitrary. We all agree this is what we're calling a chapter and a verse, but a lot of times an idea that's really part of chapter 5 carried over into 6 is cut off, and so we're just 5 and 6 are really a unit, if that makes sense. Doesn't mean I won't talk a whole lot about chapter 5, but we'll see how far we can get. Something honestly that I have never thought of until this morning is in hearing the readings aloud as opposed to reading them silently. That, by the way, was one, St. Augustine lived in the 4th century. Do you know what people, so he's a massive scholar, preacher, wrote numerous volumes that are still like 700-800 pages. What people were most impressed, spoke also many languages, what they were most impressed with about St. Augustine. He could read silently without moving his lips. This was a skill, like, wow. Who knew you could do such a thing? But I don't know about you, but I generally read silently when I'm by myself. But hearing someone else offer the reading aloud, I pay attention, or I just hear things I wouldn't normally in reading it. And today, the connection with the Old Testament reading and the gospel is pretty obvious if you just pay any attention at all about blessings and woes. But what startles me, and I've not ever read this anywhere, it feels like Jesus had chapter 5 and 6 of Ecclesiastes in the back of his mind when he did the Sermon on the Plain about the blessings and the woes. And there's no way I know to prove it, but I think you could make a pretty compelling case that he was very familiar with this book, and some of this stuff is coming out about the ways of the world is pretty similar to what Ecclesiastes Kohelet is describing in this book. Just pay attention to that. See if you notice anything too. I really like making connections where I've never heard them, or it's like if you go to a good college and by the middle or end of the second year, definitely by the third, oh wow, how this in biology connects with this, in literature with that, in arts, and all these things come together to influence one another. So certainly Jesus in that sense is a product of his time and place, and Ecclesiastes would have been a regular thing that he was familiar with and had studied. Let's begin. By the way, the rabbi will be here next week to bring us all sorts of folk wisdom to add to that. Chapter 5. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than sacrifice offered by fools, for they do not know how to keep from doing evil. Never be rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be quick to utter a word before God, for God is in heaven, and you upon earth, therefore let your words be few. For dreams come with many cares, and a fool's voice with many words. When you make a vow to God, do not delay fulfilling it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill what you vow. It is better that you should not vow, that you should vow and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin. Do not say before the messenger it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your words and destroy the work of your hands? With many dreams come vanities, havalim, and a multitude of words, but fear God. If you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and right, do not be amazed at the matter, for a high official is watched by a higher, and yet there are even higher ones over them. But all things considered, this is an advantage for a land, a king for a plowed field. The lover of money will not be satisfied with money. That's this type of stuff I'm talking about with the gospel today. Nor the lover of wealth with gain. This also is vanity. When goods increase, those who eat them increase, and what gain has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of laborers, also directly related to the gospel, whether they eat little or much, but the surfeit of the rich will not let them sleep. There is a grievous ill that I have seen under the sun, Riches were kept by their owners to their hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. Though they are parents of children, they have nothing in their hands. As they came from their mother's womb, so they shall go again. Naked as they came, they shall take nothing for their toil, which they may carry with their hands. This also is a grievous ill. Just as they came, so they shall go. And what gain do they have from toiling for the wind? Besides, all their days they eat in darkness, and much vexation and sickness and resentment. I always like to think of a word cloud. You know, what words appear most in the stories. It's not like a kid-friendly thing. This is what I have seen to be good. Oh, finally, some good silver lining. It is fitting to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of the life God gives us, for that is our lot. Likewise, all to whom God gives wealth and possessions and whom he enables to enjoy them and to accept their lot and find enjoyment in their toil, this is the gift of God. For they will scarcely brood over the days of their lives because God keeps them occupied with the joy of their hearts. I didn't hear joy at all, by the way, that whole thing. Did you notice, is this similar, consistent with what we've been reading in Ecclesiastes? Is it slightly different? How is it different, I heard? It's not uplifting Hallmark cardish at all, so it's consistent that way. How is it different?
It has sort of a happy ending.
Sort of?
Sort of.
Everything's not completely terrible and useless and havel havalim. That's vanity of vanities. Yes, this is, I would call this the, in how a young person, the DJ extended mix. These are themes we've heard before, but he puts a slightly different spin on them and adds a little bit. What he also does, which I find quite interesting, is he takes traditional sayings of Judaism and references to scriptural text and rearranges them a little bit and then reproduces them and puts them in the flow of the music he's already created. So he's DJing a bit to make this all here. So there are several aphorisms, pithy statements. That's what these are. In Hebrew, it's more obvious. Not necessarily idiomatic expressions, though there are one or two. But if this were written in English, it would be a little simpler and shorter. And we'd, oh yeah, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Oh yeah, I know. That means way more than the number of words that it conveys. And so we lose something in translation there. All of these, verses 1 through 7 out of, how many are there? 20, are about vanity, havalim, chasing vapor of vapors, chasing after the wind vanities. They're all about speech, the first 7. And I think it's very reasonable, instead of just speech, we might say all forms of communication. And suddenly it starts to become like, oh yeah, I know what he's talking about. Email, text. If there's something I was aware of, a person who is younger than I am sent me, like, I would call it a wall of text. It was how many characters can be in a text? I don't even know that. More than I think there should be. That's my answer. Because there was a big paragraph, and then another big paragraph, and a third big paragraph. And I'm of the age, like, why don't you just call me and say all that? Or it could have been in an email, because how my wife and I use text is, do we need ketchup? I'll be home at 8:30. Like, that's the longest text you will ever get from me. But anything to do with text, email, social media, Facebook, YouTube, whatever, anything to do with communication, think of how this might apply. Guard your steps is literally watch your step when you go to the house of God. In this case, the temple in Jerusalem. What does that mean, the temple in Jerusalem, just to remind everybody else? Is it just some church somewhere? where God lives within Judaism, the symbol and the center of everything that's not just religious, but you couldn't strip apart the religion and political and civic and all the rest. It's the center of everything. So when you go there, watch your step and really watch your mouth when you're in that place. Sincere listening, it says, is more pleasing to God than sacrificial gestures of fools. What was going on in the temple? Was it church like we know it? Amazing, interesting classes and sermons? It was basically, well, a few things. One was cultic sacrifices, sacrificing an animal because your child has been born. A bird, a pigeon, sacrificing a lamb like at Passover. It was ritual cleansing of the people, an individual or more likely the group or even a family. So when Jesus is born, say that? It's a loud place. You got animals. You got people. Also what's going on is there were teachers there. So you'd have somebody certainly reading Torah, the Bible, the first 5 books specifically, reading the Bible. There would be, and so we're not talking about one place. This is a sprawling complex much bigger than Calvary. You got stuff here, 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 here.
Would they be reading aloud?
They would be reading aloud because people would be listening to them. Because could everybody then likely read? No. The most learned people in that Jewish society were what we'd call biblical scholars, the scribes, the Pharisees, and so on. Levites. Pharisees wouldn't be doing stuff in the temple necessarily, but they were doing it in other places. But they're the learned people, so they'd be reading for those who couldn't read, reading aloud so other people could hear it. Long stretches of the Bible. And then other people, you might have, well, let's read like chapter 5 of Ecclesiastes, and then somebody else would expound upon it, explain it. Oh, yeah, that makes more sense because this is really weird language. And there'd be that going on. You've got money changers going on. Remember when Jesus comes in and erects the temple? Why would there money changers in there? Because you had to pay for the animals, and you can't use Roman coins in the Jewish temple, so you need to exchange them. If you go to France or Timbuktu, you've got to change for local dollars. Pretty good everywhere, but you know what I mean. You have to change the money so you use that in that local place. That's going on. You have tours, people walking around. It's really full, lots of stuff going on, but mainly it's a place of worship in a very broad sense. So there's lots of different activity. Oh, people would have been chanting psalms. Forgot that. So what does God prefer more? Really fancy words, lots of words, the most impressive gift, the fancy sacrifice, or is he saying God prefers a sincere heart? Someone who pays attention to how she lives, what she says, where her attention goes, how she fills her time, or, and we'll come back to this, somebody who pays lip service to religion. I mean, the answer is pretty obvious on this one. God prefers a sincere heart, that you live a certain way, rather than you're trying to show people that you live this way. I'm one of the right people. Look, I have this sign in my yard, or I said this thing, or I did this or that. Live that way, the writer is saying. Worship in the church or the temple is meaningless, Kohelet and all of the Old Testament and all the New Testament would say, unless it changes your heart, which in a Jewish sense, what does heart mean? You ever thought about it? When we say, I know it in my heart or I feel it in my heart, what do we mean by that in English, in American English? Your soul, deep down, the essence of who I am. They would also say that within the ancient Judaism. It's the decision-making place, they would also add, which we kind of imply when we say in the heart, but it's the very essence of who I am is that soul, that heart. Those are used pretty much interchangeably within Judaism. So unless it changes your heart, your soul, and therefore your behavior, what good is it? It's completely meaningless. God is not impressed with this. This sounds like something I would say. I really quite like this. Don't be rash in your mouth, he goes on. How much better would the world be if people were not rash in their mouth when speaking, emailing, posting, or every other way they communicate? Oh my word, that would be fantastic. Send it to Washington, send it to the media. It's not all about entertainment. Jesus says, by the way, a very similar thing. And this is where I think he was very familiar with this book. Matthew chapter 6, verse 7 says, don't heap up empty phrases as who does? Don't heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do. I mean, those other bad people. Don't do that. Say what you mean what you say. If you're going to have a vow, do it. Fulfill it or don't fulfill it, but just move on with your life. Make more words or better vocabulary or religious-sounding words. Do not make a better prayer and impress God. And the Episcopal Church is amazing at having awesome prayers. Long, flowing, beautiful English. You'll recognize there are multiple places, particularly in the Eucharistic prayer. There are no split infinitives in there. I love it. When you're talking it's one thing, but when you're reading or writing, it's a different. It's so beautifully written and elegant, back from 1549 to even the current one from 1979. Is God impressed by that? No, but it shapes how we think and interact with God. So it's not all bad. He switches verse 3. For dreams come with many cares, and a fool's voice with many words. What in the world does that mean? Very likely, I didn't hear it, Lucy.
No, I just said the second part of that is totally true.
The second part, fool's voice with many words. Sure. You can't always talk your way out of a situation, probably. This is one of those, it will say if you have a annotated Bible or study Bible, it'll say Hebrew, H-E-B period, uncertain. Like it says something, but we're really not exactly sure what it means. What most, Jeffrey?
There's some words in the Bible where that annotation says that this is the only use of this word.
That's true. So there's some uses of word in the Bible. That's the only time it's found. So we're not exactly sure what we mean, but probably from context. Probably from context, it likely means an excess in business or in life is dumb, and it's going to bring trouble. For dreams come with many cares. If you have fanciful dreams, it just adds more problems. If you have bigger houses, there's more stuff to take care of. Remember earlier when he's saying, if you think, I'm a man's man, I had so much stuff and so many women and so many houses, and then I had gardens, and then I needed pools to water the gardens, and I was terribly impressive. It's just more stuff to take care of. There's way more stuff to take care of. So an excess in business or life or religion is stupid and brings trouble. A sure mark of a fool is talking a lot without saying anything meaningful. And the point you made, Lucy, is a fool's voice with many words. Is that what you were referring to?
I just said that seems to be true in my experience.
That seems to be true in her experience. That seems to be true in Kohelet's experience as well. An empty barrel makes the most noise. This next section is more evidence that it is highly likely Kohelet, the speaker in the story, is from the upper class around the temple. Because part of it, you can see what people write or talk or think about, where their energy goes or where their experience is. If this was Jesus is a country figure in some sense, he's a country bumpkin, he would be one that was less interested in the temple. He was more interested in other things, even though he was relatively learned for his day. So if you're in Washington, and I have lived there, oh my gosh, it's like no world exists outside the belt, or outside the beltway may as well be another planet. It's like you go home to sleep there, but everything of action happens in there. And Kohelet kind of acts like he's on the inside in the temple life and is writing about that. So the verse 4, when you make a vow to God, do not delay fulfilling it. If you promise something to God, fulfill it. Good intentions without good actions amount to nothing. So what is if there's a mass shooting, or there is somebody dies, or there is some natural disaster, what do you often hear from people on TV or other forms of media? Our what and what go out to them? Our thoughts and prayers. And Kohelet is saying, yeah, great, but they need food. They need water you can drink. They need whatever else they need at the moment, not just thoughts and prayers. That's just an empty thing to make one feel better, but that's not what he says is necessarily a good thing. I could talk for like 3 or 4 times longer, so I'm trying to be fast here. Verse 6, this suggests, it's quite weird. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin. Do not say before the messenger it was a mistake. Why should God be angry? This is a very specific thing in the temple. If you make a vow to God and have a messenger who's there to collect that vow, you pay it immediately. You don't want to make God mad. It is roughly analogous to if you call an Uber and when the guy shows up, hi, I'm here to be your Uber. You know what? I changed my mind. But I had to drive over here and take my time. Yeah, sorry, I changed my mind. Don't do that. Not in religious life, this guy is saying. Probably that's a paraphrase of Deuteronomy 23:21, which says, if you make a vow to the Lord your God, do not presume to postpone fulfilling it, which is very similar. For Lord your God will surely require it of you. If you make a promise to God or anyone else, keep it as promptly and as fully as possible. 7, with dreams come vanities and a multitude of words, but fear God. Dreams or aspirations can bring havel havalim, vanities, vapor, and a multitude of words. And as we keep building the case, none of that stuff means anything of any relevance. Let it go. Instead, fear God. What does it mean to fear God? To be deathly afraid of big man in the sky. Don't take it for granted. Is anybody in here a deacon? Keeps raising his hand. Okay, good answer. That was excellent, Jeffrey. To fear God means to have respect, to be in awe of. It's totally reasonable, and Jesus himself says, when you pray, say, Abba, our Father who art in heaven. And it doesn't mean daddy, but it's an affectionate form of father. So rather than Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, Lord God of the universe type stuff, Almighty God, have mercy on, we pray that way, that's totally fine. And in context here, that makes sense. That's to be in awe. Jesus, one of the things he's offering is, that's all true. Be fearful, respect with awe, admiration, aspire to be like, but also be in relationship with this more immanent God. That's what the value in a sense that he adds. But fear God, respect God with a sense of wonder or awe. Do you remember the story Jacob in Genesis? Jacob wrestles with an angel all night. It's a draw. He's not going to let that angel win and get away. The angel knocks him in the hip, throws it out of joint, which has got to be immensely painful. And what does Jacob say? Before you leave, you got to do what? Bless me. And then after that, he says, how awesome is this place? There's this staircase or ziggurat to heaven. This is the place I meet God. That's awesomeness, fear. You could put that same quote on the front of Calvary Church. Compare walking into Calvary from the street or walking into a convenience store. It's quite shocking difference. One is about convenience, and it's got junk. The other one is like, oh, you're transported. That's fear, that's awe. The other is just, that's regular old life. So the whole section, verses 1 through 7, are about the hollow nature of a mouth. Don't be a big mouth blabber. Let your yes be yes, no be no. Guard yourselves from religion that is only lip service. I didn't know this, so I looked it up. Do you know where lip service comes from? I think this is fascinating. 16th, 17th century, the first probable use was lip labor. Lip labor, empty speech not supported by acts. You're all talk. Lip wisdom came in right about the same time. Lip religion or lip devotion, fantastic phrase, we should bring that back. Just going through the motions of religion, but not actually believing or letting it change you. We've never known anybody like that in our lives, have we? They just go to church, but they're not church. Lip religion, lip devotion. Lip comfort came around. That's also a fantastic one. Probably changed to cold comfort because of Shakespeare, but very similar meaning. And then lip service was right after all that, nice sounding stuff, promises without any intent. So all those lip ideas are right there together. Did you all know that? I didn't know that, so I had fun exploring. It's one of those rabbit holes I get studying Ecclesiastes. So verse 8, if you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of the justice and right, do not be amazed. Is he saying we should work for injustice? No. Is he saying that we should work for justice? Not really. He's simply observing this is the way things are. And there's there's always an official above him, there's an official above him. If any of you, one of my favorite shows that happened back in the day was The Sopranos, or think of any good Italian mob movie, you always kick up. So if you have this thing, I got to pay the guy above me, and then he pays the guy above him, and he pays the guy, to eventually there's a top guy, but there's this chain of money going up. It's remarkably similar to how we pay taxes here, local and state and federal, and it all goes. And somebody's getting rich, but there's always somebody above them getting more money from this. And that is largely where this comes from. There's corruption built in. That's the point that he's saying. So all these are not good figures. It's very similar, by the way, when you hear the term Levite or tax collector in the New Testament, like, Levi or Matthew's tax collector. It is not just an honest official gathering taxes for the state. How do they make their money as a tax collector within the Roman Empire? They ask for more. The government's asking for $10, so I'm telling you, you're paying $12. And $2 are for my expenses and having to deal with your ugly face and walking to this part of town I don't want to go to, and for protection or whatever. So it was corruption built in. That's how they thought of people. And so that's what he's talking about here. Always getting kicked up. If you see oppression of the poor and violation of justice, do not be amazed, because that's the way things are. Verses 10 through 17 is about moving away from speech to wealth and security. In our case, and remember, this guy portrayed himself as like the richest, most important guy around. But, and I mentioned this in the sermon too, when it says rich, well, I don't want to be rich. Well, okay, comfortable or secure, same thing. Oh, wow, that makes me very uncomfortable to think that way. That's what it's talking about in the Ecclesiastes and then Jesus later. It's not just Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos rich. It's richer than most people in the world. It's very important to me to be comfortable, to be secure, so I'm striving for these things. It changes how we interact with money and with other people. So he goes with verse 10, the lover of money will never be satisfied with money. Why? You want more. And it's a very similar line in the sermon that I think the point that Jesus is making is very similar to this is, if you get a job making $50,000, and then your next job, a friend of mine went through this exact thing. Then he started out at 100, and then he was at 130, and then he was 170. So what did he do? Does he have a much more comfortable life when he made $70,000 more, which is quite a lot for first couple jobs? He's in computer programming. No, he bought a bigger house, he got more stuff, and suddenly you're just as close to surviving as you were before. Or if you have more, you always want more, and it becomes like a drug. You have to get a bigger hit to have the same feeling that you did last time. And somehow this is 2,500 years old. Is this that different than what we go through today? I have a line in the sermon too that it's very easy to forget that people in Jesus' day or in Kohelet's day had stress and anxiety, and they had trauma, and they were afraid of things, and they had dysfunctional families. If you've read any of Genesis, you remember they're completely dysfunctional from beginning to end. There are very few well-adjusted, like people you'd ever want to spend a minute around. Very few in the Old Testament. What? The begats, yeah. We don't really, the people we like best are the ones we don't know anything about. Because if you get to know them, they're not the nicest people. So, lover of money, and they had all these problems, but they are the same people as we are, yet they had different technology, and they had a different scientific understanding. But human nature is basically the same. So a lot of this stuff still applies. Verse 11 continues the idea, with increased productivity or goods come increased demands to keep up with it all. Is it in our, if we have any economists in the room, please feel free to answer. Is it acceptable in our country if our economy has zero growth next year? No. What do we call that? After what? How many quarters? I don't remember how many quarters it is. Recession, stagflation. Oh, those are horrible sounding words in church or anywhere else. Stagflation, recession, depression. Oh my God, not here. Those are bad things. You have to have continued growth forever. And there are only so many ways for that to happen, it seems to me. And that's an impossible, you keep setting the goal higher and higher and higher, and how do you ever get there? Kohelet's saying, that's just crazy. It's all hovel hovelim. It's all chasing after vapors, trying to produce more. Or my grandfather would say, you're trying to squeeze blood from a turnip. I remember when he was like, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, exactly. Because blood doesn't come from a turnip. Why do you keep trying to do the thing that is impossible to do? And then, of course, you realize your grandparents are much wiser than you thought. So verse 12, Kohelet is restating something he said in the second chapter. All their days of people that work, toil is the operative word, is grief and pain. Even at night, their minds do not rest. This is also very similar to Jesus' Sermon on the Plain today. Why do rich people, those who have a surfeit, not rest well, and those who are laborers, common laborers, coal miner, ditch digger, whatever, why can they sleep well? Maybe because they're tired. I will tell you the most tired I've ever been, and what 100% convinced me to go to college, because I wasn't really sure at all when I was in high school if I wanted to do college. I worked in a steel shop for a summer, and I worked from 6:30 to 4:30 every day, and I made $4.25 an hour, and it was covered head to toe around steel that was like 150 degrees, and it would burn you if you touched it. And I was with a guy who smoked marijuana all the time while he was working with the crane, and I was the guy that was moving this, like he would pull the crane, I would just with my hand, and it flipped me through the air one time, and I thought, oh my God, I am going to college. But the time I got home, it was mandatory overtime whenever they told you. And the worst question I ever asked was, is this union? You will never bring that word up here again. I was like, oh my God, I won't. I slept better at that 3 months than any time in my life before or after. Because I was so tired, and I didn't want to talk about anything or think about anything. I was exhausted physically every day, and it, in some sense, was great because I would leave and it didn't matter. If you have none of those cares, that's Jesus' point in the gospel. If you're poor and you work yourself to death, you don't have time to worry about all that stuff. You're free in that sense, and you only rely on God. But why else would the sweet is the sleep of laborers? Why else would they? Because they don't have to worry about all that stuff. It's a manager's problem. It's the boss's problem, not my problem.
Yeah, for the person for whom nothing is possible beyond what they do every day, there isn't any reason to become occupied.
There's not a reason for your mind or soul or anything to be occupied because, as I said, it is somebody else's problem. Or you'll hear, it's not above my pay grade. I don't care. And they mean that in the purest, plainest sense. It's not my problem. And there is some real value to that, I think. I don't want to go back to being a steel worker at all, but, it was good for a few months. The next several, 13 through 17, they're an echo of what Kohelet said in chapter 2. It's just this going on about almost better if you've never been born because everything is a drudgery and toil and you don't get anything and you're born naked and you die naked. And it's like, geez, dude, give it a rest. So that comes back. We'll get to the good part. It's all about chasing after riches. The last few verses, 18 through 20, he says what is good, and this is a regular theme. A goal, a reasonable goal, is finding some sense of happiness in human work. And I would say, as I also said in the sermon, there's a distinction between happiness and joy, or happiness or being blessed. Happiness is completely dependent on circumstances. If your boss lets you off early, or your boss makes you stay late to redo something, unhappy or happy? Completely dependent on your boss, because you're at his or her mercy. Joy is knowing that you are loved regardless of circumstances. It's a simple distinction. So here, he doesn't think like that. That's much more of a Christian perspective on things. Kohelet says, this is what I've seen to be good. Not great, not the best ever, not a meaningful life. This is good. So, take it for what it is. It's fitting to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with the wooden toils under the sun. If you can find something good in your crap job or your messed up relationships or your broken church or you're like, why can't we find a quarterback for the Steelers? It's been how many years since Ben left? Or whatever, find enjoyment while you can. In those, we'd call them small things, quotidian, everyday things. Find joy where you can in that. Likewise, all to whom God gives wealth, possessions. He doesn't mean in this sense that, God gives it to you, but not you. It all flows from the creation, all part of God. And sometimes there seems to be, some people can appreciate a gift, some people don't appreciate the exact same thing. It just depends on what your attitude is regarding that. For scarcely will they brood over the days of their lives. Brood also means to remember. The author seems to suggest, again, not particularly uplifting. Don't think about your life too much, because you're just going to be depressed if you do. Don't think about what it all means. Don't brood over it, because, it's just not that great. Enjoy some things. That's the author. I know you get disappointed in me, Allison. I can tell. This is not Jonathan's argument about life. This is what that's so kind. This is what the author, I believe, is saying. So if you accept it or reject it or like, yes, but, all that's completely fine. So he's saying, find good when you can find it, and then don't think about it too much. That's the best he has to offer so far that we've read, isn't it? Enjoy a good meal. Enjoy what you got. If you got money, great. If you got, girlfriends or boyfriends, great. Car. But don't think about things too much or you'll just get depressed. Yes?
But doesn't he also say here that, to enjoy those things that also, God's gift? So some people can enjoy, but some can't, because only God decides who can or who cannot. Because he says,
Yes, that is a common thing. So I don't know if you heard that. Who gets to enjoy those simple things? God seems to give that favor, that ability to some people and not others. I think that maybe that's true on the plain surface of it, but maybe it's also true, as I was saying, two people encounter the same thing and they just react very differently. You know what, I'm just going to enjoy this experience. The other person would say, this is a horrible thing, I have to complain. I was with a friend online last night, and it just wears me out because they kept complaining over and over. It's like, we're all in the same game. Why do you keep complaining? You're making it not fun for me too. It's the same experience, but one guy's like, this is so much fun, this is great. And the other one's, this is terrible. Why can't I do anything right? It depends on the person. Maybe it's a gift, maybe it's simply a way of describing human nature. According to Kohelet. I don't believe that. I think it's always a choice. Say that again, God wants it that way? I do think God wants us to find joy in life. I absolutely do. He's given us a beautiful world. I'll say it. Some places it's not. Some places is for a variety of reasons of human conditions. Some it's things people have caused. Some it's just natural disasters. Some of it's not beautiful. You could say things that people have done, not just like physically beautiful, but how people interact with one another is also not beautiful. But I think it's very reasonable to say there is lots of beauty in the world, physical and otherwise, that you can appreciate or not, depending on if you choose to or not. Yeah, I mean, sunsets are nice. I was thinking of, I like sunsets. I don't want to be that cruel. I like long walks by the beach. I like, what else are you supposed to like? A friend of mine, was Andy, was trying to, he's like, I'm signing up for this dating app, and I'm 47, and everybody's all like I am, bitter and worn out. It's like, well, I'm not sure that's the right attitude to take. If you're gonna, if you're writing your own profile, looking for somebody not bitter and worn out, if you're not completely ugly or in terrible debt, let's talk. I mean, start at a different place. That there's a lot of beauty in the world, and appreciating that, or what you think about, how you spend your time, matters a great deal. And if you just want to focus on the negative, and I'm not saying we don't fix things that are broken, absolutely do that. But if you just stay there, you're going to miss so many good things. I do think that's what Kohelet, it almost feels to me if he's trying to consume everything, people and things, and say, you know what, this is good, that's not good. Whereas, and again, this is what Jesus is talking about. If you try to base happiness off of having things, you're not going to get anywhere. Enough stuff, if you're poor or hungry, or how people talk about you, or how you're related to everybody else, it has to do with the relationships would be the most important thing. Ultimately, relationship to God, and then are you loved by other people? And that, almost as by magic, will make all the other crap feel much better, or not nearly as bad. I do think that's part of Jesus' message, and I don't think Kohelet ever gets there. He's removed and consuming it all, and allows nothing to move him. Michael?
Yeah, the focus in this chapter 18 is the same one that we had from chapter 3 on.
That's right.
There are two kinds of time. There is the mortal time under the sun.
Right.
And that's the beauty of the world. The beauty of this world is going to come to an end. The sun is going to flare out and incinerate the earth, and then the universe is going to end, and the universe will heat death. The answer to that might be not the Jesus of the Synoptics, but the Jesus of John. In the beginning was the Word dwelt with
Sure.
Eternal time, according to John, is not something that comes after death. It's something we're in now, if we could but realize.
Yeah, and I think that's very good. So eternal time, which is more of a focus on the Gospel of John than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But I will say, I believe that's also in today's gospel, blessings and woes, what Jesus is talking about is being aware of eternity, not just when you die, you get a reward at the end of the rainbow, but in fact that God's vision for the creation interacts with the world now. Eternity intercedes, if that's the right word, with time, connects with time. There's a connectivity there. So eternity is everything. Time would be linear in that sense, and eternity is everywhere all around it. I do think that's absolutely true. The next chapter, 6, which is roughly half of the previous one, is really a continuation of this theme. Possessions can be a gift from God to be enjoyed, and that ability to enjoy them is also a gift. Pretty much the same thing. The brief chapter moves through 4 categories of people regarding enjoyment of possessions. So we talked about speech, we've talked about other things. Now, what do you think about possessions? So this is what Kohelet has observed. Unhappy people with many possessions. Have you ever come across somebody with means, but he's never happy, even though he's got lots of stuff? When somebody complained to me once, you know, Jonathan, I've got to cut my pledge. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, what's going on? You know, the stock market's beating me up. Oh, really? Wow. And we were at lunch in the exclusive private country club where Bill Clinton had to change his membership because there happened to be no people of color or Jewish or, it was all white Protestants type of thing. And he drove me in his new Bentley, and he was just telling me about he has a matching Bentley in a different color at his home in Palm Springs, or Palm Desert. And I said, let me get this straight. You just told me about your second house in Palm Desert and your second brand new Bentley there, and you're telling me that you can't keep up with your pledge at church, which, by the way, was less than mine. And I said, you need some speech writing help? This is not a compelling argument at all to me. And it was like so many things I wanted to say, like your spiritual life is a complete wreck. And are you serious right now trying to tell me all that? Unhappy person with many possessions. An unhappy rich person worse off than an unborn child, which is 3 through 6. A man may beget 100 children. So in Jewish culture, all the stories about Mary was barren, Sarah was barren. It's, God's not blessing you. And then have one kid is a blessing, multiple kids. So 100 kids is like a superlative blessing. It's the opposite of vanity of vanities, havel havalim, like the most vapor of vapors you can get. 100 children is, wow, no one's ever been blessed like you before. But however many of the days of his years, if you don't enjoy life goods things or have no burial, a stillborn child is better off than that guy. That's pretty severe. Uses senses to demonstrate that advantage in wealth is really no advantage at all in verses 7 through 9. All human toil is for the mouth, yet the appetite is not satisfied. By the way, the mouth is also sometimes, and it probably is, but not 100%, is a metaphor for Hades or Sheol. So think of hell as a gaping maw that's never satisfied. And the mouth can be like that too. So he's drawing this really interesting parallel. Some people seem to have everything, yet can't seem to enjoy them. And yet the next person, the stranger, comes in and buys the mansion, gets to enjoy it all. You work hard for so long, and then what do you have to show for it at the end? This, to me, is surprisingly contemporary. There are way more people in the world today than there ever have been. And yet, how much do we know our neighbors? There are more people, but more strangers and fewer neighbors, it seems to me. There's more communication, like in so many possible ways with the internet and phones and so on, but there's much less connection between and among people. That's absolutely the case today, but he makes the point then. Verses 3 through 6 is filled with hyperbole all through there. Is it a blessing to have, how do we think of it, a long life? Depends. See, there's a few other things it depends on. Do we ask, we don't, this is impolite, so don't answer. How long do you want to live? Oh, it's kind of rude, Jonathan, to ask that. Why is that rude? How long do you want to live? If you think about it, what the answer is now is probably more than what it would have been 25, 30 years ago. The answer, my hunch is, as you were suggesting, is dependent on my agency and certain conditions that I want fulfilled, not to do anything with God. That's what Kohelet is getting at. I would suggest those conditions of how long do I want to live? Do I have enough money? I don't want to be destitute. Do I have my physical health, reasonably so for that level? Do I have my mental acuity? That's important. Do I still have any friends or family to share all that with? What else am I leaving out? Being useful. Absolutely. Being useful or helpful or learning thing. Like being useful, I would suggest, has everything to do with about connections with other people. Because being useful at, 22 is different than being useful at 80. Making a positive difference in other people's lives is another way to say being useful. Those things are all really important to answer that question. So long life by itself is not necessarily a blessing at all. Long life with meaningful human connections could be a great life. So the more of that you can get, the better off you are. So you could be super rich, but if you don't have any friends, who cares? The very last couple lines there, by the way, for who knows what good it is for mortals while they live the few days of their vain life. See, I wish this guy would write hit pieces. He's so mean, he could be. Which they pass like a shadow, for who can tell them what will be after them under the sun? I picture Ebenezer Scrooge sitting in a dark with one candle in the other room, with everybody, no friends, no family. There's no fire because he's saving money, and he's counting his money all by himself. And that's like, what type of life is that? That's the image that I draw from this entire thing here. Not receiving I'm skipping around a bit. Not receiving a proper burial means not being honored by God. And it'd be like our rough equivalent would be, if you had your funeral, and nobody showed up, what type of life did you live? That's about the worst thing you can imagine. And of course, it's different if you're 105 years old versus 70 or something. But if nobody shows up at your funeral, you had no impact on anybody's life. You were never useful. You were never loved.
The good thing is that you're dead and you wouldn't know that.
You are sounding more like Kohelet by the minute, Allison. The good thing is you'd be dead, so you wouldn't know that nobody liked you. But remember, it is also the case that a funeral is for the living, not those who died, to mourn, to celebrate, to be together, and so on. That's very, very good. Part of this is, I need to go in just a minute here. The whole middle section, mouth here, I mentioned sometimes as a metaphor for Sheol. I very briefly want to say that this is kind of a little offshoot or a addendum, or as we'd have said in New Orleans, lagniappe, like a baker's dozen. So a little extra. Sheol, S-H-E-O-L in English, is where all of Jewish thought was. That's where you go when you die. It's not a heaven or hell. It's just the place of the dead. It is remarkably similar to the Greek sense of the underworld or Hades. There's no Sharon Boatman type character, but it's dark, it's gloomy, and the big fight between Pharisees and Sadducees. Pharisees were the roughly equivalent to today's rabbis that took Judaism beyond the temple when the temple fell apart. So all modern Judaism is 99% other than God, dependent on the Pharisees. They helped reinvent that. They're arguing with the Sadducees, the inside power people involved with the temple, about what this all means. And a huge part of that argument was, what happens when you die? The Pharisees were saying, well, there might be actually resurrection. The Sadducees are like, that's stupid. There is no resurrection. Or maybe there is some type of afterlife with God, Pharisees might say, what we would call heaven. The Sadducees would say, that's stupid. There's nothing in the scripture about that at all. In Genesis and Proverbs and Psalms, there are multiple places where Sheol is mentioned there. So that I mentioned the Greeks had the underworld or Hades, and Hades and Sheol is the same word, basically, Greek and Hebrew. The Babylonians had a very similar idea. And if Abraham, the original patriarch, came from the area of what we'd call Babylon, it's very likely that idea was either it already existed in the culture or he drew it from there when he's talking about it. Sheol is mentioned 66 times in the Old Testament, and it's usually inconsistent, but that's the basic idea. So Kohelet is talking about, when we die, you better enjoy it now because that's the best you got. It's not what Jesus... Now, absolutely, as Michael's talked about, most of everything Jesus is talking about is here and now, but then there is also beyond or eternity. It's a both and rather than an either or type discussion. We made it through 2 chapters today. Next week with Aaron, chapter 7. Thank you all.